Welcome everyone to Automation Hour. This is our first session of the year 2021. Yay! Thanks for joining us. So if you are joining us for the first time, all lines are muted. Please post any questions that you have to our Salesforce Automation Hour Trailblazer community, or you can post your questions here. We are recording the session and we'll be posting the link to the recording as well as the deck sometime after the session. All right, and we are booked out through mid-June of this year, so go on to our website, automationhour.com, to register for the sessions. Sign up, even though you may or may not be able to attend, you'll get a link to the recording after the fact. So we have some new presenters, return presenters, and VPs, so we're really looking forward to that. And we can't bring this free webinar series to you without our sponsor, Concrete.io, so thank you for continuing to sponsor us. And here are your co-hosts, myself, David, and Rakesh. So we're hoping that sometime in the near future, when we're able to gather safely together again, we'll be able to see one another. And I am excited to have Tom Hoffman on. He is a fellow MVP, first-time Automation Hour speaker, and we hope that he will be a repeat speaker. So laying the groundwork for that already. So with that, I will hand it over to Tom, and Perfect. You should have control.
You guys should be seeing me again. I'm going to do, I think, what's been a first for Automation Hour. I feel like, even though you may not have your cameras on, I like to talk with my hands, and I make funny facial expressions. I don't know, it helps me to see me. So hopefully that doesn't take away from this. But yeah, super excited to be here. I've always thought about being on Automation Hour, and then every time I go to submit a topic, I'm always like, is it worthy of Automation Hour? Because I've been such a fan of, I mean, Jen, Rakesh, and David, you guys' blogs are basically like kind of raised me from being a bad admin. And I still reference them, you know, weekly, if not daily, and figuring out, hey, can I do this? So it's amazing to be here on that regard. Just quickly about me, practice director at Spark Orange, been MVP since 2019. I have a site and Twitter handle that I've been neglecting lately, the Accidental Admins, but going to be picking that up again. And just on a personal note, you're from Pittsburgh. I unfortunately a Pirates fan. The quarantine has taught me to find new hobbies, and so got an aquarium, started building RC cars and lots of random things. And probably the most important thing that you could know about me, besides that I can quote Top Gun back to back almost verbatim, and I really like period dramas and anything with Hugh Grant. So if anyone wants to talk, that new one from Shondaland that just came out, I'm open to that as well. You can ask me questions about what I thought about season 1. I'm happy to answer those. But the real reason why we're here is to talk about what I've been referring to as the Nimble Manifesto. I've been thinking about sort of all the principles and things that what makes a solid approach to being an admin on the Salesforce platform. And it really all came down to me is that a good admin and a good Salesforce org is one that can move at the speed of business. That means it needs to be able to achieve all the goals of integration and all the goals of automation. And it has to be able to do that as quickly as possible to keep up with the pace of innovation that businesses experience, and especially now. So then I started looking back at sort of old orgs and things that I used to do and how I used to build, and then I would feel shame and started to group things into, well, how would I approach this moving forward? And that's where I've come up with these 2 ideals, 4 rules, and 2 goals for a sort of summarized and nimble approach to being an admin or developer or a consultant on the Salesforce platform. So that's what I look forward to sharing with you today. So just an overview of the 4 rules that you'll see here. A lot of it's focused on fundamental admin and skills that you should know. And then the last two really focus on being in charge of your org, and then also building for quick changes in the future. So this is my ranty bit. So just bear with me here. So the Nimble Manifesto really starts with these two ideals, scalability and manageability, with the idea that how do we keep up with requests? How do we keep up at sort of the pace that our organizations want us to run? Never has there ever been a company that says, oh yeah, no, we have all the Salesforce talent and resources we need. Or, hey, no, our wish list is done, you guys are free to go. And so knowing that things always change, knowing that people always want more, we have to build for these two concepts. It has to be scalable and manageable over time. And how we know this is true, just using current events, and I'll keep it light instead of painful. And this current example, right? Don was fired, Joe was hired. So everything that Don put in place in the system now needs to be updated, right? That happens every time there's a new sales leader, there's a new service leader. Regional sales manager one is out, and now he's plugged in with another one. Users always have ideas about what they want, managers, executives, everyone wants more from Salesforce, right? They want to have more automation, they want to get more tools. And like I said, there's always more that people want than there is the ability to deliver. It's why we all are employed in this space, thankfully. So if you're not building with an eye towards this, if you're not building knowing that certainly the thing that you're writing today is going to change, and you're not planning for that, you're sort of ignoring reality. And I think we can all look back at the things we've done and built and said, yes, there are definitely things that we've done that were quick fixes, or hey, I'm going to do this right now. And then you go back and it's still there 2 years later, and you're like, oh yeah. And at that point, it's in a really important place where unwinding it is particularly painful. So how do we pay attention? How do we service those two ideals? These are the 4 guiding rules of my Nimble Manifesto. So the first being document everything. You got to be able to understand where things live and how to get back there and what they impact in order to move forward. The next one is just cleaning your room. I know you thought when you became a grown-up you wouldn't have to hear this anymore, but I've seen and you've seen so many examples of just not being tidy in your work, and that mess sort of piles up. There's a saying that if you walk past something that you set down in your house 3 times, it will stay there forever. I know this is true because my wife will set something down and walk past it 3 times, and then it just becomes part of the fabric of our decor. Until I sort of like, why is there, that sock sitting on the living room floor for like the 5th consecutive day? So, or in this case, why is there still Christmas presents sitting on the living room floor? More accurate. The next one is really focused about understanding how Salesforce works and then controlling it. We'll talk a lot about order of execution and consolidation of triggers and what that looks like and means on a larger scale as you continue to build your org. And then the last part is building upon, Jen has her very awesome blog that I reference to everyone. Did I just see you hard code an ID? Oh, hell no. This is building on that concept, and it's really hard coding nothing at all. And you'll see what I mean. We take the concept of not hard coding IDs and we're changing it to we hard code no values whatsoever. These rules are going to serve really 2 goals, right? Happy admins and good user experiences, and that's it. If your admins are happy and your users have better experiences, then we've really achieved everything that we need to do on the Salesforce platform. And yeah, there's a lot of other goals that we can, break that down into. People have better metrics, or things run faster. There's less breaks, great. But at the end of the day, it's the satisfaction and the happiness of the admins who have to work in the system, and then better experiences for those who are living inside. So here we go. Here's my Nimble Manifesto at a glance, right? It's very short on words, and that's intentional because it's meant to be nimble. This is my brain's idea of a joke. Jackson. So how do we put this into action? Perfect. Document in your org. That's the first step. And I know a lot of this stuff seems obvious, right? Like add help text and description to fields. But be honest, how many of you have skipped adding help text and descriptions to your fields? It happens. I do it sometimes. Even more commonly, I see it on apps and tabs and objects where people just throw in a name and they're like, oh, people are going to know what this meant. That's great until someone doesn't, or until you're no longer the admin, or someone else has to come in and make these updates. So it's important that everywhere that you have the place to enter a description, yes, it takes an extra 5 seconds, or maybe not much of a wordsmith, but leave breadcrumbs for yourself. I think that's especially true in formulas. Obviously, if people can read formulas, they know what the formula is doing. But commenting in your formulas lets you describe your intent. And I can't stress enough, and I know Rakesh has wrote a lot about this, and that you first design before you build. I encourage everyone, I'm teaching them formulas, write a story, write what you're trying to do, write the requirements that you're trying to accomplish, and then put that requirement first and then a part of the formula afterwards. Then everyone knows, well, why did he do it this way? Why is this there? You can come into a formula that's 20, 30 lines long, and it takes a lot to unpack over time. If you do your commenting, then you're going to save yourself a lot of time in the future. That same thing applies: statements, triggers, flows, processes. I mean, descriptions are often lacking there, and it would be helpful. So it not only helps the end users, ultimately as admins and consultants and people that need to update and maintain this, it's going to help you far more. I realize it can be painful to undo some of those things. So one tool I wanted to share with you guys, this thing is amazing. I use it everywhere. It's called BOFC. I forgot the guy who makes it, but he's fantastic to work with. It's incredibly inexpensive. It's $200 for the year. And here's what I can do with it. I can go into any object and I can select, up to, I think it's like 100 fields at one time, and I can update all of the description and help text. And all I have to do is click update. I mean, just think about how long this would take you otherwise to catch up on things that maybe you didn't document. There's so much more that this tool does. And sometime, if you ever can catch him somewhere or explore it yourself, it's worthy of your time to check it out. The other one I use is Elements, and I know people are probably very familiar with Ian Gott and the Elements team, and they've been very active in the space for a long time. Elements does a really good job of documenting your org, and unlike some of the other tools that do the same thing, you can sign up for a 2-week trial and run all of your analysis and get this information. And Ian is generally okay with it. If he ever joins your user group meetings and things, he'll say, hey, go ahead, install the trial, get your analysis, and then just cancel the trial. Perfect. You can do that. That's often what I do, taking him at his word. But it gives us these sort of insights where I can come into an object and I can say, great, let me see how well documented these individual fields are. And it allows me to look at everything in my org. The next part of documentation is really process mapping. You don't have to use Elements. If you want to draw it on a piece of paper, that's fine. But if you do not have a map of your business processes and you do not have any sort of mapping or design document or drawing that you're keeping updated for your Salesforce automation processes that overlap that business process, you're setting yourself up for really painful maintenance in the future. Yes, it takes more time up front. But in spending that time up front, you're going to spend significantly less time building because you have a plan, you know what's next, you've designed it and sort of planned for all of the concepts along the way. Even if it's drawing a process builder or drawing a flow, I sketch them out on a piece of paper and just sort of know what I'm doing before I go in there. The worst thing you can do is have a requirement and jump in and just start building in flow or process builder and try and troubleshoot along the way. Similarly, how do you modify existing processes and flows? How do you add or update formulas and fields if you don't know where they're connected? So what I always like to do with that is I will draw the business process. And so in this case, I'm following what happens after a quote is accepted and up through invoicing from the business side. And then I'm similarly drawing what are we doing from a Salesforce side. And this one isn't as detailed or clean as a lot of the ones that I may do. But it at least gives me a path and lets me see why I'm doing the things I'm doing. The other things with elements that you can do is you can tag your resources. You can actually link specific Salesforce items. So I can say this is attached to that process flow, or this is attached to that flow. And you can do these drill downs, which I do quite frequently, to dig in a little bit further. So I think it's really important, just if you don't have a map of the things that you do, how can you possibly ensure that you're building on top of it correctly? How can you possibly account that you've solved for every scenario? Because a lot of times, despite our best intentions with testing, we test using scenarios that we were building for. We don't test for every possible thing that could come our way. Now on to our next guiding rule, clean. This is my clean org checklist. This is what I use to sort of make sure the places where I'm building are okay. And so obviously as a partner, I'm working in a bunch of different orgs. But when we're coming into a new environment, these are the questions that I want to know and I want to understand before we get building. Simple things like reports and dashboards. Clean these up. I'm going to tell you a bunch of different stories of what this cost people to hire a partner to solve some of these things. We were in an org recently with 3,000 reports that had not been run in over 18 months, and they asked us to get rid of them. Well, they want us to archive them, to put them in a separate folder, not delete them. And so I cannot tell you the amount of pain it takes to move 3,000 reports to a different folder. Doing it one by one is not an option. You can't do it via the Ant tools. There's really no approach to do it via metadata, except for the one that I did, which was to export the metadata, open it in a text file, do find and replace on a mass scale with a different tool, and then re-upload that metadata package to Salesforce. So there's still a very manual component. It was not an expensive thing. It should have been something that they were managing along the way. Objects, there's all sorts of tools to look at field utilization. We all know of places where there's just objects that aren't used anymore, fields that aren't used anymore. There's 18 record types and 12 of them are inactive, 30-page layouts, that sort of thing. That's what happens when you let things build up. And so just cleaning all those sort of things. Permission sets, profiles. We all know where the bodies are buried in our Salesforce instances. And I like to say, take this checklist and pick an interval, whatever it is, and commit to it. Ideally, you're doing it every release. That's the optimal. At a minimum, you have to be doing this once a year. If you're not doing this once a year, you're sort of being negligent in the keeping up to date and keeping your org healthy. So some of my favorite ones, like not deleting some of the installed packages. We just had someone who contracted us for a pretty healthy thing because they had like 30 installed packages that every time they went to uninstall, there were so many error messages that there was just no way to unwind it, and they needed it to happen. So use the tools that are out there though. I mean, Org Optimizer is fantastic. It covers so much in the way of technical debt, both from a code base and then also just best practices on the admin side. The security health check, a lot of that will get you in a good place. My recommendation here is you can use mine as a starting point or you can make your own, but have a checklist somewhere, have an interval, and then be accountable to it. Go through these steps and at those intervals and make sure that your org is healthy and clean. All right, now the fun stuff. For me, having control of your Salesforce org, I think of it like NCAA sports programs. You'll see that like they'll be fined for a lack of institutional control. I feel the same way about the order of execution in Salesforce. You should be aware of when things are firing when at all times in order to make sure that you're delivering good experiences and that also you're not miserable wondering why your criteria is perfect, your action's perfect, but nothing's happening. So understanding the order of execution will help with that. And so I bolded the ones that I think are the most relevant here. We'll come back to number 3 and 18, which is starting with apex triggers fire 4 and 8, depending on whether they're a before or after trigger. And then we get workflow rules at 11, which shouldn't be a thing in our toolbox anymore. And then at 14, we get sort of a reevaluation of all of those triggers based off of workflow field updates. And then 16, we get processes and flows launched by processes. Now, I think what's really incredible here is if you look at 3 and 18, as flow triggers have been released, record triggered flows happen before apex triggers and after processes. And if you think about that, all the things that you're doing in between with any apex triggers and maybe doing with process builder or flows otherwise, having those outside of the order execution gives us this really cool tool and really amazing set of capabilities that we didn't have before. Why this order of execution is relevant, though? Here's another vocab word for you, non-deterministic. Non-deterministic basically means it doesn't determine a darn thing. Workflow rules, non-deterministic. Processes, non-deterministic. Flows, non-deterministic. Essentially, if you have more than one of any of these things in your org on the same object, so if you have more than any one of these triggers on the same object, Salesforce has no idea which one's going to go first or second, or in the case of workflow rules, 37th, which means you have no control over your automation. You don't know what's firing first. And yeah, things may work. And you're like, no, it works, I'm good. It's sort of a ticking time bomb. As you continue to build and you make updates, you have this thing that could cause a very severe set of problems in the future. So the first thing that we really want to do from a control side is to consolidate these triggers to only have one per object. And when I say only have one per object, just workflow rules right out. I mean, it was great, 5 years ago, as this process builder is coming out, we didn't have any other alternatives. But it's time to move on from it. And so here, the trailhead will help you to walk you through migrating it. You just have to sort of let that one go as you continue to use other automation tools. The next one, consolidating any duplicate triggers. This especially applies to process builders, and we'll talk about that one in more detail. And then the last point is really choosing how you're going to control your automation moving forward. So around consolidation, as it relates to process builders, I am a staunch proponent of the single process per object. I know there is well, wait, what about is create and edited, and I still say no to that. If that is your counterpoint, though, if you need that to get away from having 5 process builders, and that'll get you down to 2, okay, we'll go for harm reduction instead of the ideal. But I think, yeah, the single process per object is the way to go. And we'll talk about a few tips here in a second that will help out. The other thing, you can cheat. You can use is new as the best way to use that in formula criteria. If you're not great with formulas, you can cheat and say create a date equals a field reference of last modified date. And a lot of objections that you see to having a single process is, well, then I have to turn off the entire process in order to make changes or to test or troubleshoot something. And I'll show you something that you can do to avoid that. So switch back over here. So you'll see here, when I say use formula criteria, you can say, yeah, and is new and not is blank. Right? So I know not everyone may be as comfortable with formulas here as you as others. So you can cheat a little bit and put in something like this, create a date equals field reference, last modified date, which is only true when the record is created. So that's one way you can get around consolidating these and for your only upon create rules. The other thing I want to show you guys is the looking at a process here. So we have a really long process. I'm calling a bunch of different things, flows, Apex classes, etc. And a way to control this is to create a very simple custom metadata type with a single field called switch. So you can see I named my custom metadata PV controller. I gave it a single checkbox field called switch. And then I create custom metadata records. So account node 1, account node 2, account node 3. And all these records have on it is a checkbox. Check for on. If it's unchecked, that means it's off. So how that works in your process builder, bringing that back. I want this to fire on create. So I say and is new, and my node switch 1 equals true. So I can turn off any one of these criteria, any one of these actions from my custom metadata. I can turn them off individually, and that allows me to do maintenance and to make sure that I'm not taking down an entire process because there's one thing that I need to troubleshoot and debug. And so I always like to recommend using this PV controller. This is really what allows you to, this plus the is new allows you to get away with having a single process and not be giving anything away on the maintenance side or the admin side. As far as having that single process, I can't stress enough that having thin controls, this is a concept in larger software development. And you'll hear it described as skinny controllers and wide actions, or there's other versions of it. But can't stress enough that having a very limited number of triggers is the way to proceed with your Salesforce builds, because then you control what happens afterwards. And in the case that you're seeing here, you can use a process to call not only the list of actions, you can use it to call your flows, but you can also use it to call Apex. So what's cool about this is you can completely erase the order of execution that normally applies to Salesforce, because everyone thinks, well, Apex has to be called from an Apex trigger, and that runs number 4 or number 8. It's not true. We call Apex from a process. And we'll call that Apex after we call our flow, after we do a field update, and before we send an email. So we can completely take over the order of execution and thumb our nose at the standard Salesforce one and using a process builder as a controller. I know the developers and others on here are probably like, yes, well, process builder is slow. Yeah, it is slower. You are giving up some efficiency here, but your manageability and scalability is maintained. And so I think there's a trade-off that has to be considered. This may not be the solution in terms of calling Apex from Process Builder for every org or every solution, but I think it is one. It is a solution. It is a approach to having more admin control and allowing for manageability and scalability. This one is getting much better. There's still one massive pain with flows that's keeping us from completely abandoning a Process Builder. But I'll talk about that one in a second. But yeah, with before triggers and after triggers on flows, we can now call basically everything that you can do in Process Builder or workflow rules. There's no reason to start with those for the most part. And so one thing about flow versus Process Builder is that before triggers and after triggers in flow are 10 times faster than a Process Builder. So as you're thinking about building for efficiency as well as manageability and scale, getting comfortable with flow triggers is the ideal. And so the thing that's keeping us from fully transitioning from me saying delete process builder from your mind and build with flow triggers only is that we can't call subflows yet. And that's with this spring release, we're getting the ability to have a is changed equivalent. We already have an is new equivalent with flow triggers upon create. And so we're getting very, very close. It's the last piece is to have subflow. And you're gonna start seeing a lot of, I imagine at that point, you're gonna see a blog from Jen Lee that says it's time to delete process builder. So transition to the last concept, hard code zero. I'm not gonna retread this subject too much here. You guys have heard it. Don't hard code IDs. Don't hard code IDs anywhere. There's never a good reason for it. Throw in a custom label, drop your ID in there, reference your custom label. We'll talk about custom metadata in a second. So I realize there's lots of other ways, but a custom label can be referenced everywhere. You know, validation rules, process builders, flows, Apex formulas. It's available throughout the entire org. So save yourself the pain, no hard code IDs. This next one's going to get slightly more aggressive. I say hard code nothing about your users. I can't tell you how many times that we see in validation rules and lightning pages hard code of references to profiles, roles, or departments, or some other user attribute. I think this is one that's tough because there's always an exception. You know, David in accounting needs the same access as Rakesh in you know, finance, except for the permission was assigned to the finance profile. All right, so now we have to come in. How do we solve that in our validation rule? If user is David from accounting, instead I say use custom permissions all the time, every time. A custom permission is just like a custom setting or anything else. It really is just a checkbox. It's a Boolean yes or no. Either it's assigned to someone or it's not. And once you create your custom permission, you can assign it via permission set. You can assign it to a profile. You can assign it to permission set groups. And now you can reference this everywhere. You can reference it on your lightning pages. You can reference it validation rules. You can now, additionally, which you can't reference, like here, that validation rule, it doesn't have any value in process builder, flow, or Apex. Custom permission does. So we can use that same custom permission to control our automation, as opposed to saying user is this and some other hard coded references there. So custom permission will get you around hard coding user characteristics. And the last one, hard code nothing at all. This one may seem a little crazy, so bear with me. I have 3 examples here of where we're referencing opportunity amount. So a process builder where opportunity amount is greater than 0, a flow where we're selecting a record where the amount is greater than 0, and then also a formula field where we're saying an amount is greater than 0. I say we should be doing none of these things. And the reason we talked about at the beginning is everything always changes. Today, it applies to an amount greater than 0. Tomorrow, with a new sales manager, maybe it's an amount greater than 100. And this can apply to anything. Someone wants to have a new task created from Process Builder. And they start off, they say, we want the subject and the description to be this. A year later, they want you to change the description to be something else. Or they want you to send an email or notice, all these different things. I say that all of that should be held inside of a custom metadata object. So this is what we use and we put into all of our builds, and that is the generic custom metadata object. We just call this settings, and what we do is we create all of these generic fields. Currency 1, currency 2, date 1, date 2. We create a field for every possible use case, and then we do this. That was sort of anticlimactic. Then we do this. This is the live custom metadata. So we have all these generic fields, but then we just use it for the examples that we need. So I needed to reference my opportunity value. So I give it a label, and I say, currency 1 field indicates the value above which an opportunity should be included in automation. And then my currency one field has a 0 in it. So I'm combining everything, like scalability, manageability, I'm having good documentation, and then I use this custom metadata value in all of those places. You can see here, custom metadata, opportunity value, currency one, my formula field, my flow, my process builder, my validation rule here. So whenever things change at your organization, all you have to do, you're not editing validation rules, you're not editing processes, you're not editing flows, you're not editing formulas, you're not trying to figure out every possible place that this was referenced. Fixing what you think is there and then going, oh crap, I missed 37 other things. You're just coming over to your custom metadata object and updating this single value. And all their work is done for you. So I'll leave you with this example before we start answering questions. This is the most recent time that I failed at my own Nimble manifesto. I did this just in December, and I was like, wow, I'm going to have to own up to this one. Property developer, they have lot fronts, 40, 50, 60-foot lot fronts. They wanted a different price book created for every property. So hey, you know, oh, I love property names. It's always like something we call it like Pine Grove or the estates at, you know, Walden. So every time they start a new property, they want a different price book created, and so we're doing that. And the way I was handling it was a PV and flow combo, and I was populating the lot size field on the opportunity products using a case formula, where case product lot size was 40, put in the number 40, 50, put in the number 50 for calculations. This works great up until what point? Up until the point that they want to have different lot sizes. And so the admin came to me and goes, hey, we love this. We need to add some new lot sizes. Can you tell me all the places it's referenced? And I went, crap. Because I knew where it was referenced because I documented it. And I had it in 6 different places. And so I had to go back and move all of that into custom metadata and update my formulas and my references and my flows and my processes. The point is that I fixed it that time. So that way, every time that they wanted to update their lot sizes, I wasn't handing him a list of 6 places to do it. I said, just go to this custom metadata record, enter the label that's equal to your pick list value, and enter the equivalent size next to it. And so in making that change from their side, the maintenance and scalability of that is much easier over time versus the not great way that I handed it off to them the first time. So with me owning up to that shameful moment in non-Nimble building, I am happy to start answering questions.
Great, because we have many. That was an awesome presentation, Tom. All right, so let me scroll up. So this is more of a comment than a question. Dominic just mentions that the bulk object field creator is a great admin tool, is run by Mohad.
Yes.
And Val. All right, so our first question is from Ruth. Do you have suggestions of mapping tool method? I am not liking Visio.
I use Elements. I use the free version for my own personal use cases. I draw everything. If you're ever, ever have me on a call and then help me do process mapping, I draw along there, and it has swim lanes, and it's very kind of intuitive. And you can just sign up for your own version, whether your org has Elements and does the paid version. The free Elements allows you to do all the process mapping you want, and it's really, really helpful.
Someone else responded with Draw.io as an alternative. All right, so the checklist will be included in the deck that we post. Next question goes back to the order of execution. So do you mind just flipping back to that slide?
On my way, we are there.
All right, so 3 and 18. Literally every rule runs twice or before save on 3 and after save on 18.
I'm not following. Is it, are you asking if every field, like every, at point 14, is everything reevaluated, or are you asking if, or I guess it's tough because they can't. I'm not, Jen, maybe you can help translate it for me. Are you following? We're trying to get out.
I think so, but Ruth, if you could just clarify that, that'd be great. And then we'll move on to the next question, loop back. I'm not completely getting the CMDT on off. Could you elaborate?
Certainly. So at the end of the day, an off switch is what? An off switch is our circuits connected, our circuits disconnected. We can do the exact same thing with custom metadata. So let's just pretend for a second, we'll delete this. This is our only criteria for this process builder node. And what I'm saying is, this is just the object reference. Let's just focus on our field here. By record, account node 1, switch field equals true. So these are just records. Here's my switch field. It's true. If I were to turn this off, if I were to uncheck switch, when this process builder goes to evaluate this condition, it'll read it as false. It'll say, oh, my decision false, execute default outcome, if you were to look at the like the debug log. So it won't fire. So within a single process like this, creating a custom metadata type to control it allows you to turn off each node one by one. And so it gives you a really, really fine granular level of control, and it prevents you from having to, say, deactivate an entire process while you're doing certain things or making certain updates. It's also, for me, it's wonderful during deployment because I can activate the new process and then test each condition individually if I want to. So you can come back in, turn your node on and off in order to testing as you're validating your deployment. Hopefully this answered that, but if you need a further explanation or demo of it sometime, happy to.
Yeah, we use something similar in our org, and we also use it in our triggers as well, because you can't turn off triggers in production.
Yeah, some of you guys might be familiar with cloudtoolkit.co, which is a wonderful set of tools and things like that. That's out there, it's free, it does wonderful things. And they have this config switch, which is really kind of the same concept, except for you don't need to log in and go through that Heroku app for it. You're building your own configuration switch. And like Jen said, having whoever's doing development for you build this into your triggers and being able to turn them on and off is pretty incredible.
All right, so we got a clarification from Ruth on the order of execution. So she says, you had said on number 3 and 18 is when flows run. I wanted to clarify if every flow runs on number 3 and 18, or before save flow runs at 3 and after save flows run at 18.
Yes, that's what it's meant to say. So flows run 3 different places actually. Before trigger flows run at number 3. Auto launch flows that are called from a process builder run at number 15, and record triggered flows come after record trigger flows come at 18. So having that at our disposal is such a cool thing. Once they solve the calling the subflow gap, we're going to have sort of this infinite power where we can look at our brilliant developer friends and kind of be on the same page.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next one, no hard coding, CMDT for currency 1. How do you then know all the references out there you want to now base on to say 100 instead of 0? One might be for not moving to a stage, but another might be for not allowing trial or free samples. does the
Absolutely.
manager want both of those processes to be 100?
Yep. What was the last example you gave, Jen?
One might not want, one might be for not moving to a stage, but another might be for not allowing trial or sample or free samples.
Right. So we just change it to what we want it to be, stage progression limit, and we say currency one field is used in the opportunity stage progression validation rule to prevent moving forward if there is no value. Right. So now we have a unique label for that. We can create the next one. No trials, sir. You know, and we'll say if currency one is less than 100, it's not a C note, no sample, sir. So this comes back to the flexibility of it. We're using that same field over and over and over again. And when we look at our custom metadata type, this is the most maddening thing with custom metadata types is there's no way to get back. We'll get there eventually. There we go. So now we have our three different rules here, and so we can come in and edit them that way. So when you reference it, so when you're looking at this particular reference here, you can see I have my custom metadata settings, and then my record name, opportunity value, or my record name, no trials, sir, or my record name, stage progression limit, and then I reference that currency one field.
Yep, we have something similar in our org too.
Yeah,
And
basically, my entire presentation, this whole Nimble Manifesto is not like, this isn't unique to me. I'm basically, I said my goal at the beginning was how do we put together a cohesive like philosophy that describes how to admin and build for Salesforce. And everything that's in here is borrowed or stolen from Jen Lee, David, and Rakesh anyways. So it only felt right that it was my first topic for Automation Hour.
developers should be excited in spring 21 because now they could reference a CMDT directly in Apex. They don't have to do a SOCL query.
That's it. That is awesome.
Yeah. All right. Next one is from Dominique. Thanks for sharing your approach, Tom. Any recommendations on the naming conventions for your CMDTs? For example, currency one, currency two, etc.
Yeah. For me, I always like to keep it generic, and I'll show you how I make sense of it. So I give myself lots of help text because again, we need to document our work. So I number field, and I say CMDT does not support currency with 2 decimals. When used with currency one, it represents the higher end of the range. And so, you know, I try and leave myself these little nuggets, but I do try and keep the names as generic as possible for the actual fields, only because I want it to be able to be used everywhere, everywhere that it can. The other approach to this is for specific apps, and this might be more helpful and more comfortable for people if this really super generic approach just seems too foreign. I look at it, when I build an app, I'll call it sales settings or service settings, or, you know, in the case of the other one, you know, property management settings. And so I'll have a different custom metadata type that's specific to the business unit or business function or app that this goes with. And that way I can be a little bit more granular. I can name my fields with maybe some better or clearer labels. And it also allows me to group CMDT records a little better. So you don't have to keep it super generic. You can be specific and build it to make more sense for yourself and be app and functionality specific, just as long as you do it in CMDT and don't hard code it anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like for example, in our org, we have a CMDT that's just for error messages. So you put all the error messages
Mm.
in your whole org in one place.
I cannot stress enough. If you do that, um, if you start referencing creating task, anytime that you need to create a task anywhere, or create a message or something like that, where you have control over about what's going out, um, put it into a custom metadata record. Like even chatter posts that you need to do.
Mm-hmm.
How much of a pain is it when someone says, "Hey, can you update that chatter post?" You're like, "Oh, it seems like much more effort than it's worth." If you put it in a CMDT, just go and fix it, and you're on your way.
Right. Okay.
You can also grant users access to custom metadata types. So if there's someone that you really trust, and you had one called like your chatter posts CMDT, you can grant a user access to edit them themselves, and then it's off your plate altogether.
Mm-hmm. Jordan just makes a comment, great design. It is like a circuit breaker for your process builder.
Yeah.
And let's see, Mike, what use case would you build a generic setting CMDT as a custom object instead?
Oh, I've seen this. I would only do that if, it was a big if, um, you needed to have regular users have access to settings, and that's the use case. Um, and it's the where that I think it works is when you're using your that sort of setting to control the UI. And so every user has access to like their own custom setting record, and as they update those fields, there's a bunch of different ways to do it. You could, update custom settings, or you can update a CMDT, or you can have a reference to the user, or a bunch of different ways. But then you use that to control, maybe like how pages appear, whether certain sections appear in dynamic forms, that type of thing. That's the most obvious use case. Otherwise, I try and avoid it only because of the limitation of migrating data.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and if you create a sandbox, you don't get the those records, or you do a refresh, you don't get the records.
Right.
Yep. Next comment, users accessing CMDT. Now you're talking crazy.
No, it is. But here's the thing, what's less crazy is building them a front end to it, right? So imagine if that custom object scenario where you want users to have access, still build it in CMDT, and give each user their own individual record, and then create a component that kind of gives them the access to those checkboxes, and they can control it. So it's a little crazy, but there's ways to dress it up so that the user doesn't know the difference between a custom object or a custom metadata object.
All right, so last calls for questions. Anything related to Tom's presentation or any general process automation question?
Or
AMA, ask me anything.
Yeah, my favorite Hugh Grant movie. I'm ready to go.
How excited is Tom for Top Gun 2?
Oh my gosh. Okay. I cannot tell you the amount of disappointment that's been in my life that Top Gun was not was delayed and then delayed again. We've just had so many plans around going to see it, and so to me, I know, and this is not to make light of the many tragic things of COVID, but it's probably been the most personal disaster I've experienced as a result. So that, and not be able to go to a baseball game.
Okay, question from Rachel. Stance on Process Builder and Flow versus Apex, given that you are not required to test the declarative methods.
That was me taking a pause to think. there are certain things that make more sense in Apex. Render upon to Caesar, right? Uh, it's a tough one to take a definitive stance on because as admins we want to have as much control as we can. We want to see how far we can take it, but you have to know the limits, and those limits should be defined by two places. Again, happy adminning and better experiences. If we're building something in Process Builder and Flow just because we can, that should have been in Apex to deliver a more efficient or more optimized experience for end users, the end user requirements and business requirements should ultimately carry the day. So that's my best answer to that. As regard to not having testing and code coverage, yeah, that's a bit of a tough one. And I think that's where having documentation and making sure that you understand the things that you're doing. I realize that's sort of a cop out because code coverage requires that you're not doing any harm or you're following all the rules. Whereas you can build all sorts of automation and not run into validation rules until you actually put it into place or turn it on. So I just think testing is incredibly important. You can't if you don't spend 20% of your time in testing something that you built, you probably haven't tested it enough.
All right, and then the last comment says, many thanks, Jen and Tom. Awesome session today.
Great. Maybe I'll be invited back sometime.
I started the session saying that you can come back at any point in time.
Yeah, that was before I opened my mouth, though, so you never know.
All right. So thanks everyone for joining our first session of the year. We're definitely looking forward to having you back for our many sessions. Tom, please come back. And we will be posting the deck as well as the recording soon after the session. So look out for that. We'll post it out on the Trailblazer community, Salesforce Automation Hour, on our website, automationhour.com, and we will be also tweeting that out. So thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Right.
Thanks, Tom.
Take care.
Bye.